You're tuning into the Active Mom Podcast with physical therapist, Dr. Carrie Pagliano, a real mom's guide to all things postpartum return to workouts after baby. If you're a postpartum mom, coach, trainer, or physical therapist looking for answers on how to get back to running, CrossFit, yoga, Pilates, HIIT, you name it, without the fear of pelvic floor issues or doing something wrong, this is the podcast for you. Let's start the show. All right, this next guest, she had me at the title of her book, which was Why Moms Don't Jump. And so we'll do the American translation, basically Why Moms Don't Jump, which to me is like the quintessential, like if you wanted to say anything about active moms and what would resonate with every single active mom, it probably would be that statement. So I'm so excited to have Helen LEDWICK, and she goes by Why Moms Don't Jump on Instagram. Thank you so much for A, writing the book, and B, joining us on the show today.
Oh, amazing. Thank you for inviting me. Very exciting. I think this is my first transatlantic podcast.
Ooh, I feel very honored. Nice. All right. So I love it when I see, and we talked about this for a second. I love it when journalists write or writers write about these sorts of experiences, because I think as medical professionals, we like to get in the weeds on our jargon and make it technical. And you guys just plain share the stories. So how does somebody go from, a writer or journalist to all of a sudden now you have a book about peeing your pants in postpartum? Talk to me about that. What was that journey?
Okay. Wow. So my background is as a journalist. I was a BBC journalist for 15 years, a broadcast journalist. So a lot of sort of producing radio, a lot of speaking on the radio, producing news programs, that kind of thing. And kind of alongside that, I became a mum, right? So I've got a 10-year-old daughter and now an 8-year-old son. And developed a prolapse after my son was born. So I had a 3rd-degree tear. It was a VBAC, a vaginal birth after a section. And a couple of weeks later, that became a prolapse. And that, I really struggled with that. Like so many women that I'm sure you've spoken to, I had never even heard of that word before. I didn't know what a prolapse was. I had no idea that was a thing that could happen. And I really struggled to find any good information or support to kind of help me through that stage. So for several years, I was continuing in my job as a journalist and trying as a mum to cope with 2 young kids and the symptoms of prolapse. And I guess the two sort of collided in a way, because I, after a few years of really struggling, just really decided that I needed to share my story and just reach out and try and find other people who were going through it, because, it is so stigmatized and shameful and quiet. And it was not something I was talking about. I was not someone who was equipped to talk about my most intimate parts. I get very embarrassed very easily. I'm just not that person. So I started talking about it on Instagram. That was where it all started. And through sharing my story, sort of started to meet other women, and the journalist in me switched on and was a bit like, yes, we need to share all these stories, because this is what's helping me feel better, is the connection with other women who are going through the same thing, and the ability for us just to talk about it without the shame, and to, just support each other in that way made all the difference to me. So I was like, this is, sharing these stories, and in a podcast form, that was kind of my comfort zone, having come from radio. That's how it all began. And then it sort of rolled from the Instagram to the podcast. And then a couple of years ago, one of my listeners got in touch, and she was a literary agent. And I often find this with the women who engage in the podcast and with the Instagram account and stuff. They are so engaged because for so long, no one was talking about this, right? And I'm going back, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, especially. And so I feel like sometimes when they listen to the podcast or they see the post on Instagram, they're like, okay, I'm galvanized. What can I do to help? And so this has happened several times, in different ways. But this woman was a literary agent, and she was just like, I have struggled. Your podcast has helped me. We need to take this to the world. Would you consider writing a book? And it really, and honestly, like, I'm actually not someone who has ever considered myself to have a book in me. You know, I know, even though I was a journalist, like, it wasn't really on my bucket list. I've never really considered myself as a writer in that way. But like with her support and just understanding, I guess, how to share those stories that you sort of
Right.
mentioned, that was how the book came about. And
That's
it's
amazing.
a mix of women's stories from the podcast and expert voices, you know, physiotherapists like yourself.
Right.
Just kind of, on my story, just finding our way through various pelvic floor dysfunction, hopefully to a place where we know a bit more about it and we just
Right.
feel a bit more hopeful and a bit less alone and a bit less ashamed and a bit more ready to
Yeah.
fight for what we need to get better.
Definitely. And it's so interesting to me that and I've been very conscious kind of being in this space. My kids are a little bit older than yours. They're soon to be 10 and 12. And in some ways we feel like not as relevant or be able to connect to these new moms with babies, but at the same time, like I very much know the information that was in our circles when you and I were having kids. And it wasn't great. And we didn't have a lot of options. And I treat completely differently now than I did, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. But it took you having those experiences and then this weird world that is
Yeah.
social media, and then whatever the pandemic did to elevate and, you know, magnify that, I think to have this plethora of voices that are coming out now and sharing this. And I'm kind of jealous. I'll be honest. I'm really jealous of the moms now that they have so much information that we did not have. I mean,
Yeah.
do you remember when somebody uttered prolapse, that word for the first time? Like
No,
what did you
it
think?
literally Dr. Google that I read it. So you know, I stood a couple of weeks after my son was born, I stood up. I'd done two things. I had lifted my toddler that day and it had twinged, and I
Mhm,
had strained on the loo to do a poo and then rushed back to the screaming baby who needed feeding.
mhm.
And I stood up from the sofa and I felt a bulge in my vagina, and you know, like as if I was losing a tampon, that sort of discomfort that you can feel.
Yep.
And I knew that didn't feel right, even though I was still very much recovering from the damage of the birth, from the birth. That was very different. So I went up to the bedroom and took a mirror and had a look. And I've said it before, but I think that was the first time I'd ever had a look, which, you know,
Right.
says something else, right? And then just got my phone out and started Google imaging, which was, you know, just describing using
Sometimes that's
words.
good news, bad news too.
But it wasn't good. It wasn't good. And then so
Yeah.
literally that's the first time I'd come across that word prolapse. And even now, the
Yeah.
word, even just the word, just speaking the word, I find it kind of ugh, it's an ugh word for me. Like the more you say it, the easier it gets. But everything all the connotations of that word, what it meant
Yes.
for me and my body and my life and the permanence that it felt that it held,
Yes.
was really frightening. And I really nearly called an ambulance there and then. Like I was like,
You're
because
kidding. Oh
no,
my
because
goodness.
I read this word and then I'm on Google and it's kind of saying your insides are falling out. And I'm thinking
Right.
that is a medical emergency. I feel like I need to go to
Right.
A&E for that. But I didn't. I texted my midwife. I was still with the midwife at the time, so I texted her, sort of calm down a little bit. But yeah, that's the first time I'd heard it, and that's where it all started for me. And that was
And
my
then
second child, right?
well, and I was gonna say, so you had a C-section the first time,
Mhm.
and then did you just cough it up to, "Oh, this is what happens," like, did you try and sort of justify it that, "Oh, this was, a vaginal delivery, this is what happens." Did you try and kinda rationalize what was going on, or were you just,
So
like, flat out horrified?
I was just flat out horrified because
Okay.
I came out of the birth, and I say it was a third degree tear, but I had no idea what that meant because
Right,
in my head, like everybody tears when they have a vaginal
right.
birth. So I just thought I'd had a tear, like everybody has a tear,
Mhm.
but this time came out of the right hole. So must have done, you know, that's got to be better than a C-section. So I'm probably going to be good in a couple of weeks. Like I think that, I
Right.
mean, who knows where my head was at the time, because you're all over the place, aren't you? But
Of course.
I definitely didn't realize the severity of the tear and
Yeah.
what that meant for my body. And
What
I
did
often
your
wonder, like, if I had, would I have maybe taken a bit better care of myself afterwards? And I know it might have happened anyway. I totally know. But, maybe I could have given myself a slightly better chance. I don't know.
I think that's common though, and I did
Mhm.
it myself too, that in the rear view you question,
Yeah,
could you have done
guilty,
anything to prevent it? I
guilty.
think that comes up a
Absolutely.
lot.
Yeah.
What did your midwife tell you when you called her and you said, "I've
Um,
got this thing," and even what did she share with you about, your prognosis with the third-degree tear?
do you know, like, not much. I mean, we just exchanged a
Right.
text. I said, I was like, I think I might have a prolapse. She was lovely. She was like, well, let's get you a GP appointment. And then it was like a couple of weeks before I could see the GP, who
Mhm.
was a bit like, I was like, this is big world, big life stuff for me. For 2
Right.
weeks, I was like walking on eggshells, really terrified to kind of stand up with any force or walk too far or lift the baby or whatever. And then the GP appointment, like for so many, I think was very much like, well, it
Right.
happens, you know. And then, I did then get referred to see a urogynecologist a few months down the line. And I think I got to see a physiotherapist about a year after it happened. Um,
Mm,
but really, anything that I really knew about it is what I looked up online. And
right.
like it was just frankly these really often like really sad forums and groups where
Yes.
people were just sharing their absolute lowest moments and their biggest fears with complete strangers,
Right.
because nobody really has any better information, and everybody's worried about being open about these conditions with their nearest and dearest.
Right.
So, yeah, and as a journalist, I just, like, couldn't believe that all this was going on and that I'd never heard of it, and that it was so prevalent and yet so taboo. And,
Right.
trying to find out just how prevalent it was and finding figures all over the place, but certainly it was a large number of women, and
Yes.
just couldn't believe that something on this scale was so hidden.
Right. No, I very much remember the first time. It was my very first pelvic floor course, and I remember hearing it and being mortified, and not ever thinking that it would be anything that would impact me. I ended up with symptoms after having two C-sections, and I think
Mhm.
that was, what we were always taught, that it was vaginal delivery, vaginal delivery.
Yeah.
It's that. And I mean, we weren't having conversations about pressure management. Like there were so many things. It was basically,
Mhm.
you had a baby, do Kegels. If Kegels don't work, too bad, have surgery. Which,
Mhm.
when you're in this field as a physio, that's not like, what do you mean I can't fix all this stuff? Like that's why we went into it. But then also too, I mean, I feel like, back when our kids were little, it even if you could get to see a physio, you weren't gonna go till, like, a couple years out or something like
Mhm.
that. Like, what's standard of practice where you are?
I don't even know if there's a standard. I think, like, as with a lot of things with the NHS in this country, there's
Right.
very much like a postcode lottery.
Yes.
So I guess depending on where you live, you might be in to see an amazing pelvic health physio within a couple of weeks of having, especially if you have a third degree tear or a fourth degree tear, you're supposed to have an automatic referral into that system, I think.
Mhm.
But you can wait, like you say, you can wait a year, 2 years even to get into the
Right.
system. And then, yeah, I guess it depends, who you see and how long you've got with
Right.
them. And there is this kind of NHS. If you're lucky enough to see an NHS physio, there's that, and then you might be able to pay to see a private physio, and I guess you might get a longer session,
Yep.
um, just because of the nature of how things work. But there's certainly not enough pelvic health physiotherapists,
No.
and there's not enough awareness, because that, as well as never hearing the word prolapse before, I'd never heard that
Right.
there was anything called a pelvic health physiotherapist, which is not what they're called in America, right?
Wait,
Um,
I don't know what they're calling
Physical
us now.
therapist.
Yes, we're physical therapists, yes.
Yeah, right,
Although
okay.
we're starting to adopt the physio because it's just a lot easier, I'll be
Yeah.
honest.
Um,
So for
But
you,
yeah.
like, what was your pathway in your journey? Kind of, you figured this out, you know what this is, you've gotten confirmation. Kind of what was your physio journey?
So the first time I saw a physio was about a year in. So that was the referral from around the time of the birth. And by that time, I'd already, through talking to various people, kind of worked out how to do pelvic floor exercise. So or Kegel. So I was kind of religiously doing Kegels fairly well. I saw the physiotherapist, and I guess she checked my strength and stuff, and it was okay. So I don't know, I didn't get a lot out of it in that sense,
Right.
but what I really got out of it was a massive emotional release, because in
Mm,
that room, speaking to that physiotherapist was probably the only person at that time I could have a conversation
right.
with, because they knew what it was. They knew the word. They weren't going to be horrified. They'd seen
Right.
it before. They understood how I was feeling. So more than anything, I just got some emotional support, I think, from those sessions. And then I was discharged, and it wasn't for another like 2 or 3 years when I realized that maybe that wasn't the end of my recovery journey, because I left those
Yes.
appointments thinking, right, well, this is as good as it gets. I
Right.
shouldn't run, I shouldn't jump, I shouldn't lift. I just have to keep doing pelvic floor exercises for the rest of my life, and that's kind of me. And I was like 30, late 30s, whatever I was. And it wasn't until a few years later, around the time I started on Instagram, that I realized, maybe there is more I can do. I can go and see
Right.
a pelvic floor physiotherapist, and actually, I can learn. And this is where I learned that, it's about that your entire core and your glutes, and you can do those exercises, and it's vital that you do that strength training and all the rest of it. And that very slowly set me on the journey back to being, the active mum that I was before I had my kids, and that I was
Yeah.
devastated to lose, or thought that I'd lost forever.
Yes.
And to now have come right through the other end, where I'm back to doing the things that I wanted to do. I go for a run, I lift. Things don't faze me, they don't overwhelm me, and I'm not afraid of them like I was for a really, really long
Right.
time.
Yeah. And I again, like, going back to the time frame, we didn't have a lot of options other than what you got as physio. And there really was a transition that really, I think, coincided with greater sharing of information, and you getting on Instagram and that sort of thing too. Excuse me, that we started to realize, okay, we need to bridge this gap. And so it's really cool to see that you kind of said, okay, well, I think this is it. And then realized, there could be more, about the same time that we were kind of
Mhm.
experiencing that as professionals
Yeah.
ourselves. And so, can you share like a couple stories that kind of stick in your mind, that you share in the book, or you had experiences, kind of chatting with people, or that they're sharing their stories on Instagram?
My other people's stories or my stories?
Other people would be great. Yeah, like anything that stuck on your head is like, yeah, this is exactly why I need
Yeah.
to talk about this more.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what might be quite useful is, like, for me, it all started through Instagram. So actually, the power of social media, something really
Yes.
random happened. A woman in Australia who was following me on Instagram, I'm in the UK, had a friend who lived in Manchester, where I live,
Hmm.
who also has a prolapse. She was like, "You guys should go and meet for coffee or something." I was like,
That's
"Okay,
amazing.
well, I'm in this whole weird world where I'm talking about my vagina on
Weirdest
the internet. Why
date
not?"
ever.
Yeah, pretty weird. So we met in a coffee shop with our toddlers, and she also had a friend who had a prolapse as well. So she came along with her toddler as well. And we
Oh my
just had the
gosh.
most amazing lunch in a coffee shop with the kids all playing together, and us just sharing our deepest intimate issues openly, like we'd been friends for years.
Oh my
And that
gosh.
that has still to this day, like, probably had the biggest impact on how I felt about my own experience and my prolapse. Just knowing that here's two young, cool mums living their lives, going through the same things as
Yeah.
me, but like when we're just talking about it together, it doesn't seem like such an issue anymore.
Right.
And that was kind of part of the trigger of me wanting to share more stories. And it was really hard at first to get people to want to talk to me, right? Because, like, number one,
Yeah.
I would have to know that they had a problem, which
Right.
is not like, hi, June, how are your bits? Like, it's not a conversation that
That's
you
what
can
I
just
do
like.
every day.
Have to be a bit stealth. Well, I know, but they come to you, right? So you've got a pretty good
That's true.
inkling that
It's
they
it's
might
it's it's an understood question.
have to be a bit stealth about it. But so yeah, so then bit by bit sort of found friends of friends or people who were open to the idea of discussing it. And women who like me, like, didn't want to do the things or didn't feel able to do the things they used to do in terms of
Right.
yoga or running, or I mean, some situations are more extreme than others. One of the women in the book, Chantel, she had bowel incontinence really badly, and that affected her whole life in so
Yes.
many ways that I can't even imagine. Just going to do the grocery shop, or it was a problem for her at work. She didn't want to go to work without she'd had to like do a home enema in the morning.
Yep.
She would have to maybe skip breakfast sometimes to not have issues when she was in the office with colleagues and things. And I'm always just so grateful to those women for sharing those stories with me, because I'm a bit hesitant even kind of trying to use my own words to tell theirs, because it's so deeply personal, and it's so brave of
Yes.
them to share it. But one thing you will notice this as well whenever you hear women speaking about this, like, you get the same sort of journey of events, which is kind of like complete sort of shock and shame and fear that turns into a bit of a grief, I would say, for like the person that
Yes.
you were before, and the fitness or the wellness that you once had. But like, over time there's a bit of an acceptance, and then
Mhm.
if you add to that maybe like knowledge and
Yes.
information and rehabilitation, then it kind of becomes a story of hope. And those are very much kind of the stories that I like to try to tell, even when I'm not a medical professional. I definitely can't fix people, and sometimes people, there isn't a fix for everyone, right?
Right.
Like, and I
Right.
never want to pretend that there is, but I do believe that there's always this kind of story of hope and this story of like improvement.
Yeah.
And I'm going off piste a little bit, but one thing I keep coming back to at the moment, I keep thinking about this. Someone sent me a message yesterday, in fact, a listener who she was thanking me basically for doing the podcast and what she got out of it, because what she had got out of it was the ability to sort of just feel less ashamed, feel able to discuss it, feel able to sort of set her own boundaries, and make time and space for herself, and just had this like massive mental shift about how she viewed her own body and the issues that
Yes.
were going on with it, and how that in turn had helped her physically feel so much better, just maybe in terms of like holding tension and those kind of things. And
Yes.
for ages, I've just been like, it's really great, we're all feeling better. I can't fix you. This isn't gonna fix you, but maybe it's gonna make you feel a bit better. And just over time, and speaking to another physio recently, Michelle Lyons,
Yes. Uh-huh.
yeah, and she was just like, Helen, this can, physically, if you heal or if you improve how people are feeling mentally, like, yes, that can actually have physical implications on their symptoms. And
Yes.
that's, to me, I was like, oh my goodness, that means that just sharing these stories, just having these conversations is the
Yes.
most powerful thing you can do for free.
Yes.
And then if you add to that sort of signposting to the best help and support that you can
Mhm.
get, and for your individual journey, like, why are we not talking about this every day to everyone at all at all
That
times?
is a wonderful point. It's funny you brought that in with Michelle, because I feel like how I look at prolapse as a provider has changed in the last 4 years. And it very much was an organ goes out, nothing you can do, you can't stuff it back in, support
Yeah.
it, move on with your day, right? And it was the beginning of COVID, and I was treating virtually, just sort of checking in with clients, seeing how everybody was doing. And every single person I think in the world was in some degree of fight or flight. And I think moms were in next level fight or flight because you've got these kids at home and kind of all
Yeah.
this other stuff. And I can't think of a single client that I checked in with that their symptoms, for whatever it was, wasn't worse. Like everything was
Yeah.
worse. And I'm thinking, okay, how do I treat somebody without these? Like my hands are tied behind my back. What do I do? And it really was to go into like mom survivor mode and to look at just basic things like breath and tension. Like, okay, how can we kind of calm the nervous system as much as we possibly can when the world's burning, right? And I was astounded at, I checked in a couple weeks later how many moms were like, oh, you know what, that helped a lot. Just being, oh, I'm not breathing. Let me breathe. Let me let go of my tension just a tiny bit. Those two things. And then it kept happening. And I'm like, we're onto something here. What is this? And a few years kind of before that, we were sort of considering pelvic floor overactivity in the context of leakage and stress incontinence. I'm like, why can't it be the same with prolapse? If we are so heightened, if we're so hypersensitive, and to your point, if people just feel understood and not like the world is falling, and prolapse on the hierarchy of like bad postpartum things, I probably fecal incontinence is above it, but not much. But it's up there. And so that's why I love that you kind of came to that conclusion, because I think it so coincides with, we did not understand prolapse the way we understand it now. And I dare say we're going to continue to understand it better in the future, but sharing these stories and calming the nervous system and decreasing hypersensitivity and that kind of stuff, there's something going on with that.
Yeah,
Like, is that
definitely.
something that's kind of come up a little bit with you?
Yeah, 100%. And it was like, it has been a bit of a light bulb moment in the past couple of weeks, like through that conversation with Michelle, because I was just like,
Yeah.
yeah, like I say, I was always a bit like, well, I can't fix you. This isn't going to fix you. But then I know it made me feel so much better that,
Right.
I still have a prolapse, but but you don't realize the extra strain that the mental stuff puts on you,
Yes.
when you feel so fragile and so broken and
Yes.
so shameful and just decrepit and just uncomfortable and maybe like whatever other symptoms you've got going on as well. It's just really, really hard. And if you can take just a little bit of that away, the
Yes.
difference is huge.
Yes.
Um, and like I say, like I didn't it was yeah, it wa obviously didn't this has all been so organic and it's just evolved over time.
Yeah.
But I think that is what's going on, and I think that's why, I get the most incredible messages from people, from all over the world, and, they're so powerful because oftentimes I think they've never really shared these stories with anyone for the
Right.
reasons that we've talked about, right? And now there's
Right.
an email address and they can write this story, and sometimes it comes literally with a whole
Yes.
Word document attached. And sometimes people have been living with these issues, and you will know, for like 25, 30 years,
Yes.
maybe didn't even know that there was actually a word for the thing that they were experiencing.
Mhm.
Um, and, they've been to the doctor, maybe they've been told it's just normal when you have a baby and all those kinds of
Right.
conversations. Um, and yeah, and I think just finding your people who understand that, finding
Yep.
your village, hearing these stories, yeah, your physical symptoms aren't going to change on day one, but just, yeah, feeling mentally like you're not alone and that it's
Right.
okay to talk about it and you've not done
Yeah.
anything wrong. There's nothing to be ashamed of.
Right.
It just makes
Right.
it's kind of magical how that's made such a big difference.
I have noticed that a lot. I mean, it's probably you do as well, get a lot of DMs from people sharing their stories. And as a clinician, my job is to look for the holes. I work a lot with a lot of women with second and third opinions and that sort of thing. And so my job is like, what what have you done? What got missed? Um, and usually that's the piece, because people don't realize there's so much physical manifestation of that, like our nervous system, that fear, that protection. Like if you feel something falling out, and that's one thing I always have clients like, what does prolapse feel like? I'm like, if you had to ask that question, you don't have it. Like, it's one of those things, if you know, you know. But like, think about it from a brain perspective. Like if your brain thinks part of it's coming out and you feel that all the time, of course you're going to go into protect mode. And what
Mhm.
can we do to dampen you and make it feel safe? And it's very much a parallel to women that have pelvic pain, because it's also very shameful. It's not something that you talk about. You're
Yeah.
protecting, guarding. Like, there's so many parallels in that space, but there's not a lot of crossover conversation because a lot of women with pelvic pain aren't in the pregnancy and postpartum space. And so I'm like, wait, we're having the same conversations here. Let's
Yeah.
let's
Mhm.
unite our forces for good. But again, it comes back to stories, and it
Mhm.
comes back to sharing and building that community. And again, the good and the bad news about social media is, for all the bad that it brings, it also brings conversations like this forward so people don't feel alone,
Yeah.
which I love. Since the book came out, kind of, have you been made aware of, like, there's far more people than you ever realized, or new stories, or what's kind of happened since you went from like Instagram to podcast to now the book is out and in print?
All kinds of things really. I mean, one interesting thing was, and like, so when we've been talking about this for a few years in this sort of space, and you sort of think everybody knows it now. You think it's all out there, don't you? You think,
No.
oh, now every woman knows about pelvic floor dysfunction and
Mm-hmm.
incontinence, and prolapse, and pelvic pain and everything. But so I did like a couple of radio interviews, and we did a phone in, and yeah, some of the callers on the phone in were just like, again, I've been living with incontinence or whatever it is for 10, 15 years since my kids were born, and I just thought that was normal, and I didn't
Right.
know there was
Yep.
anything I could do about it apart from wear a pad every day, which is what I do. And suddenly it was kind of like slightly out of my bubble of Instagram and pelvic health world and out onto the national radio in real world, and you're just like, oh, okay. So yeah, like, amazing. That's even more reason why books like this and podcasts
Right.
and the social media is essential information. And it kind of puts a bit of a fire into your belly again, doesn't it? When you realize how much it's needed. So
Exactly. Right before we talked today, I was flipping through social, and there was a Huffington Post article that came up talking about uterine prolapse, and it's only,
yeah,
apparently they highlighted nearly half of women ages 50 to 79. I'm like, wait, what about the rest of us that this
yeah.
started early? And some of the stuff that just kills me, it causes a sneeze, lifting something heavy, or trying to have a bowel movement can lead to the issue. I'm like, it's more complicated than that. Why are, like, now everybody's going to be scared to poop and lift things? And then, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
this one was just killing me. A common condition that occurs when the muscles in your pelvis weaken and cause the uterus to release. I'm like, that's not at all what it is. I'm like,
To
this isn't
release. Wow.
I'm like, oh no. And I'm like, and I think that's the hard part for me, being like, that's why I so appreciated your book. It's like, okay, you're putting out some really good, well vetted information and stories, and we still have this crap on a
Yeah.
daily basis that we're having to combat. It's like, for every step
Mhm.
forward, there's like, oh, bad information that we've got to keep
I
fighting.
know, and sometimes it's difficult as well because, like, part of me wants to just celebrate anything, like anything in the public consciousness. If
Yes,
we're
I
talking
agree.
about,
However,
vagina, genitalia, anything, just get it brilliant because I guess that paves the way. But
hmm,
yeah, it is still the case as it was, for me 8 years ago, that
right.
maybe now there's even so much information out there. It's really hard to know what is sensible advice and what is just nonsense. I just remember online just lists of all the exercises you should never do. So that
Right.
coupled with the actual health advice at the time of like no high impact, no heavy lifting, no running. And then it's like no planking, no sit-ups, no what,
Right.
just no to everything. And I was so confused by all of that. So
Hmm.
yeah, but I guess the first thing is we need to be comfortable talking about it. So maybe that's okay. But then very quickly after, let's just get some sensible people who actually know what they're talking about and
Yes.
get them to inform people.
Yeah.
Um,
No, and that's where
but
I think, honestly,
yeah.
there's a huge role for journalists and authors. I'm really fortunate. I work with our national association here in the States, the American Physical Therapy Association, as
Mhm.
part of the media corps. So
Right.
we can kind of speak to things and whatnot. And so, of course, you can tell them 30 minutes of great stuff, and they pull out one sentence, and it's mildly out of context. But having journalists that I think, that experienced it, understand that there can be confusion, and help to clarify the confusion, like, and do it in a way that is accessible to the average person with really minimal barriers. Because again, and I'm going to throw my field under the bus, we like to get in the weeds really quick. We're doing better with social and trying to make entertaining, but sometimes it's almost too simple and you know, all sorts of issues. But that's where I really think journalists, writers, like they're our biggest hope as far as advocacy in moving this forward, because if stuff like this is still happening, like it's just going to make the whole train move slower. So
it's so difficult, isn't it, as well? Because one of the things that I've often thought about is like when I very first started with the podcast, I was like, okay, I need what's my like elevator pitch? How am I going to describe what this thing is? And like, you know, we've already discussed, I'd never even heard the word prolapse. So they're like, it's a podcast about prolapse. And like 99% of the world's going, what
is that?
Yep. And like, and so like even just finding like pelvic floor, you'll read pelvic floor dysfunction, pelvic floor disorders. Who really even knows what a pelvic floor is anyway, like out there in the normal world? And so I think, and then like you mentioned, you know, having like I don't even know. See, this is it a hypertonic pelvic floor? Is it what do we say? Like high tone? Now
that's a rec and a half too. Like that's all mixed up.
Yeah. So I wish someone would just come up with like an official, you know, what's the word when you official words, official language to talk about this stuff in the first place. It would really help.
You know what? I think you bring up a really good point, because even medically, and I think this is the problem with research, and I think when we explain this in layman's terms, it makes a lot of sense why things are confusing, because first of all, I'll just blame the patriarchy and then we'll get that over with. Second of all, not enough women in research, that sort of thing. But the terms that have been used over the years, there's no consistency. And because there's no consistency, it makes it really hard to do these systematic reviews and come forward with accurate information. And then I think it's multidisciplinary. So one of the things, I think there's some organizations that are trying to find some consistent language so that we can be cleaner in the research, like hypotonic or hypertonic. But what's interesting again is in physio world, tonicity can have a neurological component. We talk about that kind of stuff with like somebody with a spinal cord or stroke or things like that. Is that really the same driver? And we don't know. There can be that there, you know, maybe it's an orthopedic issue. Like there's so many pieces there. And then it's hard to cross like physio literature with urogyne and urology, and like everybody's kind of got their own pissing match going on. And so you are not wrong. Like we're confused over here, but there's also so much that we don't know. So that when you bring it forward, making things simple, like you've got muscles that are on too much. And typically we were always told that postpartum, your muscles weren't on enough and needed to work more. Like, even though that might be like perfect from a physiological standpoint, I think people kind of get that in like, okay, I need to relax more. I need to calm my system more. I need to be able to coordinate and be able to turn on and off instead of just on. That sort of simplified messaging, I think, can be helpful, but you are not wrong. It's a show over here.
No. Well, then you add to that the fact that we barely know the words for our own genitalia to start with in the first place. It's like, how do we have a conversation about this thing when we haven't even got the language? But
well, and I think having kids too, like, I mean, I've been very cognizant, definitely with my kids, about we are going to call things what they are anatomically from the start. My daughter, she knows how to look at herself and what things look like, and it's not weird to her, you know, for years, and she's 9, almost 10 now, to look and know what things are supposed to look like and what they're supposed to be. And to your point, the first time that you may have looked was when you've got this really scary thing going on. So now this is whole biased your nervous system and your brain to protect and guard. Like, can we get better information when they're, you know, really young, which is a whole nother kind of conversation too.
But so yeah, I think there's a long way to go, isn't it? And by the way, I liked you using the word coordinate your muscles. I feel like that could be a really useful term to reach people. it's not that you need to we don't know if you need to strengthen them. We don't know if they're too tight and you need to relax them. But what you need to learn to do is coordinate them so they can be tight and relaxed and everything in between when they need to be. I think that's a good word. I'm going to use that more.
Oh, good. I like it. Well, and I as a physio, I do enjoy that because I do think it resonates. And again, we get in the weeds on some of our words. And how do you explain to somebody what is going on with their body? Because I think it's so important to have ownership over what's happening. I very much, with my patients, I want them to understand well beyond our time together if they have a flare in symptoms. Okay, what brought that on? What can you kind of surmise from that situation, the status of your pelvic floor and so on, and what can you do to triage those symptoms based upon what you understand about your own body? Like having that agency over what's going on, I think it reduces that fear. And I also don't want to be that person that somebody feels like they can't do anything without me. Like, I don't want to be like that. I want to do what I want when I want. So, but no, I think there's, and I love that there's more collaboration. I think we need more people that can see complex topics like this and be able to translate it into regular language and make it accessible, because that's, again, how we're going to move this forward, because people understand, they know what questions to ask their provider, they know how to explain their symptoms, they know how to kind of understand that even more. So you're doing a really big job here. I don't know if you realize this, but
thank you. Yeah, like I say, it's just it has just sort of evolved out of my own experience, really, and it sounds a bit twee, but it is a privilege, and I feel like I've done something quite big with my life, having, like
you have.
it's a good feeling, and a privilege to kind of be the person that people trust their stories with and want to share those. So I feel like we're turning a tanker, aren't we, in terms of like getting this information out there and empowering women to know what treatments are available so that they can advocate for themselves. But I feel like, things are moving in the right direction.
It is. It's turning. And again, I've been at this 25 years now, and just in the rear view. And I think having spent the last, 12, 13 years going through it myself, we've gone far further in that period of time than, in the 10, 15 years before that. But so I feel good about it. It's like you have to pause and accept the things that are good now, but then also it's hard to look ahead and know you've got so much more to do. All right. So at the end of every show, I ask our guests the same questions. First one here for you: favorite activity since becoming a mom?
Oh, does hiding in the cupboard and eating chocolate count?
Yes, it does. That is the best answer I have gotten in a year and a half of doing this show. So well done. What's your favorite chocolate? What's your poison?
Oh, I'm quite partial to a crunchy. Do you have those? It's like honeycomb wrapped in chocolate.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, that sounds really good.
With a cup of tea. Always with a cup of tea. Always.
Love it. Love it. All right. One piece of advice for new moms, maybe that are kind of facing down prolapse.
I mean, see a pelvic health physiotherapist. I mean, if you can't, like, see your GP in the UK. So your first port of call tends to be, there's loads of different routes, but tends to be see your GP and ask and just try to get to do that. If you can go private, I suppose, you'll see one quicker, but definitely that is the best piece of advice I would give to someone.
Love it. Love it. All right. Who is someone that maybe you met or encountered kind of through this whole process over the years that we should know about? Who's kind of made an impact on you?
So you probably Emma Brockwell.
I love her.
Yeah, she was one of the team that put together the first return to running guidelines for pregnancy a couple of years ago. And she's so kind and generous with her time. And she was the first person that I came across on Instagram who was like, she's like a qualified physiotherapist, so she obviously knew what she was talking about. She has
Mm-hmm.
prolapse herself, and she
Mm-hmm.
has a lot of advice about, running and doing all these exercises that I had previously thought I would never do again. So I was like, yes, I'm a bit of a fangirl of Emma. So
Me
she's
too.
Physio Mum UK on
Yes.
Instagram. Yeah.
Yes. I talk to her frequently when I can. I just love her to death. And her and Grenya are just lovely people. We've never met in person. We need to work this all out.
Oh, for sure.
But yes, no, she's
And I
fantastic.
forgot the book as well, right? Why Did
Right?
No One Tell Me? Which
Right.
is like, if I'd had that book when I'd had
I
my
know.
son, I feel like I would have got here a lot faster.
Right. And I don't know how she had time to write that and have all her kids and work and all that too. And then Grenya's working on her
Yeah.
PhD. Like they're super moms in my book too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
all right. And then last question is, what does it mean to you to be an active mom in postpartum?
So I felt like with my second child, I really kind of missed out on this whole period because of the struggles that
Mhm.
I was having. But it is just, I mean, who's not an active mum postpartum? Because you are, I mean, come on, like every time you bend down on the floor, you stand up again, which you do all day, every day, chasing them up and down on their scooters, like lifting the heavy bags and the car seats and the buggies and all the rest of it. So you need to be fit for that,
Yes.
and that's what I think. I didn't realize how physical all of that was, or the toll that it was taking. And that's before you even throw all the things, all the kind of leisure things I wanted to do in the mix. So what does it mean being an active mom? It's just being a mom, isn't it?
Yes.
You've got no choice in the matter.
No, I think that describes it well. And you have no sense of what that looks like until you've walked through that
Yeah.
door and on the other side, it's all there.
Yeah.
That's perfect. That's perfect. All right. If you want to learn more about Helen and her book, Why Moms Don't Jump, Ending the Pelvic Floor Taboo, there's the title right there. You can find her on Instagram at Why Moms Don't Jump. Helen, thank you so much for sharing your story and having the courage to kind of find your inner writer and kind of sharing this vulnerable part of the postpartum journey with the world. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Did you enjoy the podcast? If so, leave us a 5-star review on iTunes and tell a friend to do the same. Are you a postpartum mom or postpartum pro wanting to know more about getting back to running after baby? Check out all my free goodies on carriepagliano.com. This podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Carrie Pagliano and her guests to the show. The content should not be taken as medical advice and is for entertainment purposes only. Always consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions.